Hello children, hope you guys working hard now as you have few weeks more for your exam. So today I am going to discuss with you the grade 11 biology lessons. Without further ado, let's move into the lesson. The first lesson of your textbook is living tissues. Let's see what are the tissues. A group of cells with the common origin that has been modified to perform particular functions in the body is known as a tissue. Simply, tissue is a collection of cells and it has been modified to perform a special function. First of all, we are going to discuss about the plant tissues. The plant tissues can be categorized into meristematic tissues and permanent tissues. Difference between these two types of tissues are the meristematic tissues, the cells are capable of cell division, and the permanent tissues, the cells in the permanent tissues are unable to undergo cell division because they are permanently modified. The permanent tissues can be categorized further as simple permanent tissues and complex permanent tissues. The simple permanent tissues consist one type of cells. For example, for the simple permanent tissues are parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma tissue. The complex permanent tissues consist more than one type of cells. It has different types of cells. Examples for the complex permanent tissues are xylem and phloem. Then let's move into the permanent tissues. As you can see in this figure, the permanent tissues are, as you can see in the figure, the meristematic tissues are located in apical meristematic and the intercalary meristematic and as lateral meristematic. The apical meristem involves to increase the height of the plant. The example for the locations for the apical meristematics are shoot apex, root apex and the axillary buds. And intercalary meristems are present at the nodes of grass family plant. It involves to increase internode length. This is the internode length. The lateral meristematics helps to increase diameter of the stem. It is located cambium tissue of dicot plants and plant stem and roots. The characteristics of meristematic tissues are the cells of the meristematic are compacted because there are no intercellular spaces and there is a large nucleus present inside the cell and the large number of mitochondria present to provide the energy undergoes to the cell division, and the chloroplast and many of other organelles are absent in the cells of the meristematic tissue. Then simple permanent tissue. There are three types of simple permanent tissue. As you can see in the figure, the cells of the simple permanent tissues consist one type of cells. The examples for the simple permanent tissues are parenchyma tissue, collenchyma tissue and the sclerenchyma tissue. The parenchyma tissue consists spherical shaped cells and it consists vacuoles, intercellular spaces and nucleus. For the collenchyma tissue, it also has the vacuole inside and also it has nucleus, and some of collenchyma tissues consist intercellular spaces but some of them doesn't exist intercellular spaces. The most distinguished characteristic of collenchyma tissue is the walls of the collenchyma tissue consist the corner of the collenchyma tissues walls are thickened with the extracellulose. The sclerenchyma tissues are non-living tissue. They does not exist the nucleus as well as cytoplasm, and they doesn't have intercellular spaces as well. The sclerenchyma tissue consists as fibers and sclerite type. There are two forms. They are fiber type and sclerite type. The second figure you can see the detailed diagram of each tissue. First one is the parenchyma tissue. The second one is the collenchyma tissue. It can be identified by the thickened corners. And the third diagram, as you can see, the fibers and sclerite type, it is the sclerenchyma tissue. We can compare these three types of tissue. Parenchyma consists living cells, collenchyma living cells, and the sclerite cells non-living cells. The wall is thin and uniform, and it is made up with the cellulose in parenchyma. The collenchyma consists corners of the cell walls thickened with extracellulose, and the sclerenchyma cells have lignified. The parenchyma has intercellular spaces prominent, and the collenchyma intercellular spaces may or not present. Sclerenchyma no intercellular spaces. The parenchyma, the cells are spherical shaped cells, consist large central vacuole. The collenchyma polygonal cross sections, elongated cell, and the sclerenchyma also polygonal shaped cells. The locations of the parenchyma are cortex and pith, and the fleshy parts like roots, leaves in the plant. The collenchymas are present in the veins of the dicot leaves. The sclerenchymas can be present pericarp, seed cords of dates, and coconut fibers and wool fibers, like etc. The complex permanent tissue. As I mentioned earlier, complex permanent tissues consist different type of cells. You can see in this figure, it consists different type of cells. Examples for the complex permanent tissues are xylem tissue and phloem tissue. Xylem tissue, it helps to transport water and minerals in the plant, as well as it provides the support to the plant. The xylem tissue consists 4 types of cells. One is trachid, second one is xylem parenchyma, then next one is xylem fibers and xylem vessel element. Those are the examples for the cells present in the xylem tissue. In here, the xylem parenchyma is living cell, and xylem vessel is non-living cell type because it has lignified cell wall, and the trachedes also non-living cell type, and the fibers, this fiber also non-living. It consists 3 non-living cells and 1 living cells. The second complex permanent tissue is phloem tissue. You can identify the difference between xylem and phloem tissue as in figure. The phloem tissue consists CU plate, CU pores or CU plate. CU plate has phloem tissue, but in xylem tissue it doesn't consist CU plate. From that you can separate xylem tissue and phloem tissue. The phloem tissue consists phloem parenchyma, phloem fibers, companion cell and CU tube element. These CU tube cells are living and companion cells also living, and the parenchyma also living, but phloem fibers are non-living. In phloem tissue, it consists 3 living cells and 1 non-living cell. If you remember, xylem tissue consists 3 non-living cell types and 1 living cell type. But in phloem tissue, there are 3 living cells and cell types and 1 non-living cell type. It is xylem phloem fibers. The phloem tissue involves to translocation of synthesized food and provide the support to the plant. It is translocation, not transportation, right? This translocation of food is done by the sieve tube cell. It doesn't consist nucleus. It is controlled by companion cell. Next, let's move into the animal tissues. As you can see in this figure, we are going to discuss about the muscle cells tissue and the connective tissues, nervous tissue and epithelial tissue. Nervous tissues consist brain, spinal cord and nerve cord. Muscle tissues are 3 types. We are going to discuss cardiac, smooth and skeletal tissues. And the connective tissues, we are going to discuss under the connective tissues about the blood. First animal tissue type is epithelial tissue. This is the figure of the structure of the epithelial tissue. As you can see in figure, it consists basement membrane and the cells are lies on the basement membrane. The cells are tightly packed. The characteristics of the epithelial tissue is cells are lies on the basement membrane and the cells are tightly packed without intercellular spaces, and there is no blood supply but there is a nerve supply. There is no blood supply but there is a nervous supply. The locations and the functions of the epithelial tissue are: it provides protection. The epithelial of the skin provide the protection, and some of the epithelials are provide secretion function, and some of them are doing absorption function, and some of them are exchange materials, and some of them doing secretionary function, and some of them doing filtration function. The locations of the epithelial tissues are skin, epidermis of the skin, and some of glands, and the inner lining of the intestine, and in the alveoli and glomerulus. Those are the some locations of the epithelial tissue. Major function of the epithelial tissue is lining and covering the surfaces. Lining and covering the surfaces. Apart from that, protection, secretion, absorption, exchange materials, and secretion and filtration also can be done by epithelial tissues. The next type of the tissue is muscle tissue. There are 3 types of muscle tissues: skeletal muscle tissue, smooth muscle tissue and cardiac muscle tissue. The difference between 3 types of cells, muscle tissues, as follows. The skeletal muscle tissue consists cylindrical muscle fibers. As you can see, they are cylindrical. But in smooth muscle tissue, they are spindle shaped. The cardiac muscle tissues also cylindrical. The skeletal muscles are unbranched, smooth also unbranched, but cardiac muscles are branched. Skeletal muscle tissues are multicellulated. Smooth muscles are uninucleated. Skeletal muscles are multinucleated. Smooth muscles are uninucleated. Cardiac muscles are uninucleated. And in skeletal muscles, you can see striations. These are the vertical lines are called striations. The smooth muscles doesn't consist striations, but cardiac muscle also consists striations. The skeletal muscles doesn't have intercalated disc. Smooth muscles also doesn't have intercalated disc, but these cardiac muscle tissue consists intercalated disc. These are the intercalated discs. Those are the main structural differences between these muscle tissue. And the functional differences also have in between these three muscle tissues. The skeletal muscles are voluntarily contracted, smooth muscles are involuntarily contracted, and the cardiac muscles are involuntarily contracted. And the skeletal muscles fatigue quickly, smooth muscles fatigue slowly, and the cardiac muscles never fatigue, and they have rhythmic contractions and relaxations. The locations of the skeletal muscles are tricuspid and locations of the skeletal muscles are the muscles present in the legs and hand, and the smooth muscles, the locations of the smooth muscles are walls of the gut, walls of the respiratory tract, walls of the blood vessels. Those are some examples. And the cardiac muscles are present in myocardium of the heart. The next type of tissues are connective tissues. There are different types of connective tissues. Some of them are dense ones, some of them are compact ones. And the examples for the connective tissues are adipose tissue, areolar tissue, compact bones, and blood. Under this lesson, we are going to discuss about the blood under the connective tissues. The difference between blood and other connective tissue are the blood consists fluid matrix. The other connective tissues consist solid matrix. And also the other connective tissues consist cells and fibers in naturally, but in nature the blood doesn't consist fibers, but it consists cells. And also in the blood the matrix doesn't secreted by the cells. The blood can be categorized into two parts. One is plasma, the other one is the corpuscles. Corpuscles is the below one, and the plasma is the yellow and light color part. Plasma consists 55%, corpuscle consists 45%. Plasma consists majorly water, waste products, nutrients and hormones, protein, gases, minerals, ions. Those are the compounds contained in the blood plasma. Blood plasma involves to transportation of different materials throughout the body. The corpuscles are three types. One is red blood cells or erythrocyte. They are biconcave shape. It consists hemoglobin. So it has red color. It involves to transportation of oxygen throughout the body. The other one is platelets. Platelets involves to blood clotting, and the other corpuscle types are leukocyte or white blood cells. There are 5 types of leukocyte. They are neutrophil, eosinophil, basophil, monocytes, and lymphocyte. These neutrophil, eosinophil, and basophils are consist as granulocytes. Granulocyte, because it consists granules like structures in their plasma. But monocytes and lymphocytes are known as non-granulocyte. It doesn't compose granules like structure in their cell plasma. The last tissue type, the leukocytes, involves to protect body by the foreign organisms. they do phagocytosis, or they destroy foreign organisms like bacteria or other microorganisms by producing antibiotics. The last animal tissue type is nervous tissue. The nervous tissue is consist with neuron. The structural unit of the nervous tissue is called neuron. There are three types of neurons. One is sensory neuron, the second one is interneuron, and the third one is motor neuron. The structure of the motor neuron is like this. It consists cell body. Within the cell body there is a nucleus, and the cell body consists dendrites, and from the cell body arise long projection. It is called axon. Axon is covered by myelin sheath. In between myelin sheath there are nodes of Ranvier. This node of Ranviers helps to increase the rate of the passage of impulses. This is the direction of the passing impulses. The impulses are carried towards the cell body by dendrites, and it carries outward or away from the cell body by the axon. The main function of the nervous tissue is transmit impulses. It's all about the tissue lesson. I'll come with my next video soon. To stay with me, please subscribe my channel. Thank you.